August 14, 1938. Sturgis, South Dakota. 9 men lined up on a half-mile dirt track converted from a horse racing oval at the Meade County Fairgrounds. One of them was named Johnny Spiegelhoff, a young professional racer from Milwaukee who his contemporaries called the Milwaukee Demon. The prize purse was $500, worth roughly $10,000 today. There were perhaps 200 people watching. Pearl Hoel had cooked the food, weenies, sloppy joes, potato salad, and watermelon for dessert. The riders ate in a tent behind the garage at the Indian Motorcycle Shop on Junction Avenue, run by her husband Clarence, a man everyone called Pappy. The iced tea and coffee were free. Nobody left hungry. That was the first Sturgis motorcycle rally. Not the Black Hills Music Festival with its stadium concerts. Not the Buffalo Chip with its premium camping packages starting at $189 per night. Not the 10-day commercial event that generates $800 million in annual economic activity for South Dakota and draws 500,000 people from every continent on Earth. 9 riders, 200 spectators, weenies and sloppy joes in a tent behind a garage, and a man named Pappy who had pivoted from the ice business because refrigerators were making ice deliveries obsolete and had decided, with the specific stubbornness of a South Dakota man who had ridden motorcycles since he was a teenager using them to drive cattle on his family ranch, that the Black Hills needed a motorcycle race. Everything that followed, every single thing, came from that one decision made by one man in one of the most remote corners of the American Great Plains. To understand why the greatest motorcycle rally in the world exists in Sturgis, South Dakota, you have to understand first how improbable the choice of location actually is. Sturgis sits on the eastern edge of the Black Hills in western South Dakota. The nearest major city is Rapid City, 25 miles to the south. The nearest metropolitan area of any scale is Denver, Colorado, approximately 350 miles to the southwest. Minneapolis, Minnesota, the nearest Midwestern city, is 7 hours by car. Chicago is 12 hours. New York City is 22 hours. South Dakota in 1938 had approximately 642,000 residents, making it one of the least populated states in the country. Sturgis itself had a few thousand people. The Black Hills had been the site of a gold rush in 1874 after George Custer's expedition confirmed the presence of gold, which had triggered the Great Sioux War from 1876 to 1877 and the illegal seizure of land from the Sioux Nation, a legal dispute that the Supreme Court would eventually rule on in 1980, finding that the land had been taken unconstitutionally and awarding the Sioux Nation $106 million in compensation that the tribe has never accepted, instead continuing to demand the return of the land itself. The Black Hills are sacred ground to the Lakota Sioux. That history sits underneath everything that happens in this landscape, and the motorcycle community that built its annual gathering here has largely ignored it. That is worth naming before we tell the rest of the story. What the Black Hills offered in 1938, stripped of all context, was this: roads. Extraordinary roads. The Needles Highway, State Highway 87, a 14-mile ribbon of asphalt through granite spires and through tunnels so narrow that 2 modern vehicles cannot pass each other, had been completed in 1922. The Iron Mountain Road, US 16A, 18 miles of switchbacks and pigtail bridges that offered frame views of Mount Rushmore, would be completed in 1933. The wildlife loop roads through Custer State Park, the canyon roads through Spearfish Canyon in the northern hills. These roads were not built for motorcycles, they were built for automobiles. But they produced, incidentally, some of the most technically rewarding motorcycle riding terrain in the middle of the North American continent. Tight, technical, dramatic. Roads that rewarded skill and attention in a landscape that had no equivalent within 500 miles in any direction. That is why Pappy Hoel chose the Black Hills. Not as a calculated business decision, because he lived there, because he loved the roads, and because a man who has been riding motorcycles since his teenage years on a South Dakota ranch understands, at the molecular level, what good roads mean. Clarence John Hoel was born in South Dakota on May 30th, 1904. He grew up working in the family ice business, delivering ice to households in the days before mechanical refrigeration. By the early 1930s, refrigerators were becoming common in American homes. Pappy watched the ice business contracting the way a man who has spent his adult life in a specific trade watches it die, with the specific combination of grief and pragmatism that people who work with their hands bring to economic change. He chose Indian motorcycles. In 1936, Hoel purchased an Indian motorcycle franchise and opened his dealership on Junction Avenue in Sturgis. Indian was, at that point, still the viable American alternative to Harley-Davidson, a Springfield, Massachusetts company that had been making motorcycles since 1901 and that would survive barely until the early 1950s before collapsing under the weight of management decisions that made AMF's later management of Harley look competent by comparison. Pappy Hoel was not a passive dealer. He was a racer. He had been riding since his teenage years, using a motorcycle as a working tool on the ranch and then as a competitive machine when the opportunity arose. He understood that the best way to sell motorcycles was to create conditions under which people could see what motorcycles were capable of, to create a community around the machines that made owning one feel like belonging to something rather than simply making a purchase. In 1937, he founded the Jack Pine Gypsies Motorcycle Club. The name came from a club meeting at which members submitted suggestions before the Jack Pine Gypsies emerged. The club held its official first meeting on January 21st, 1938. 6 months later, they held the Black Hills Motor Classic. The historical record on the first rally has some inconsistency in the numbers. Pearl Hoel, who was there and who cooked the food, said 200 men, women, and children attended. Other accounts say closer to 80. What everyone agrees on is this: it was small, the racing was the centerpiece, the stunts were spectacular in the way that 1930s motorsport spectacle was spectacular, boardwalk crashes, half-mile flat track races, head-on crashes with automobiles arranged beforehand for the crowd's entertainment, and Pappy himself performed. His favorite stunt was crashing a motorcycle into an outhouse that had been set on fire. He called his stunts tricks, fun, and foolishness, a phrase that tells you something essential about who he was. This was not a man building a brand. This was a man who loved motorcycles and wanted other people to love them too, and was willing to crash into a burning outhouse to make that happen. Johnny Spiegelhoff won the race. He was a professional racer from Milwaukee, backed by Indian Motorcycle, the Indian dealer's champion, showing what the bikes could do. He would win again in 1939. He would become, across the early years of the Black Hills Motor Classic, the defining competitive personality of the event. Pearl and the other club members' wives made the food: sloppy joes, weenies, potato salad, watermelon. The riders ate in a tent behind the garage. The iced tea and coffee were free. The following year, 800 riders came, not through advertising or organized promotion, but through the specific network of the motorcycle community in the upper Midwest. Riders who had been at the 1938 event told other riders about it. The racing was real, the roads were extraordinary, the food was good and the beer was cold, and Pappy Hoel was the kind of host who made every person who walked through his door feel like they had been specifically expected and specifically welcomed. The rally was canceled in 1942 and 1943. Gas rationing in support of the war effort made a motorcycle rally impractical. In 1938 and 1939, the country had still been in the Depression. The rally had provided cheap entertainment and modest economic activity in a region that needed both. When the veterans came home, they came to Sturgis. This is the detail in the Sturgis history that almost nobody has properly documented. Pappy Hoel's relationship with World War II veterans is one of the central stories of how Sturgis became what it became. The Fox News profile of Pappy Hoel, published in 2024, drawing on interviews with people who knew him, includes this specific quote: "Pappy would listen to the veterans' stories and let them vent." The historian Co. Meyer confirmed this pattern. Veterans came to Sturgis not just for the racing. They came because Pappy Hoel was a man who understood that the men coming home from the war carried something that most of civilian society did not know how to receive. He listened. He welcomed. He did not require anyone who walked through his door to be something other than what they were. The motorcycle clubs that formed around World War II veterans in the late 1940s, the same clubs that would eventually produce the Booze Fighters, the early Hells Angels, the culture that Life magazine would distort into the outlaw biker myth at Hollister in 1947, many of those clubs found their way to Sturgis in the post-war years. Pappy welcomed them too. Before we go further, if you know someone who has been going to Sturgis for 30 years and thinks they know the full history, send them this video right now. The story of Pearl Hoel cooking weenies and potato salad in a tent behind a garage in 1938, and Pappy listening to veteran stories when nobody else would, has never been told at this depth on YouTube. Post it to your Facebook motorcycle group. Put it in the Sturgis subreddit. Text it to the rider who has been going since before you were born. Every share puts this history in front of someone who needs to know where this actually came from. I want to stop here and describe the riding that Sturgis made available, because the roads are the reason the rally survived everything that was done to it and everything that was asked of it. The Needles Highway, State Highway 87 through Custer State Park. 14 miles of road built in 1922 through a granite landscape that should not have been buildable. The Cathedral Spires Tunnel is 8 feet 4 inches wide and 12 feet tall. A modern full-size pickup truck cannot pass through it. The road requires your complete attention at every moment of every mile. In the 1940s and the 1950s, this road had almost no traffic except during the summer tourist season. A rider who arrived in Sturgis in the early years of the Black Hills Motor Classic and took the Needles Highway on a Tuesday morning in August had 14 miles of one of the most technically demanding paved roads in the continental United States almost entirely to himself. The Iron Mountain Road, US 16A between Custer and Mount Rushmore, 18 miles of switchbacks and pigtail bridges, bridges that loop over themselves in complete circles to gain elevation without requiring a straight line climb. The road was designed specifically to create a slow, winding approach to Mount Rushmore that framed the monument through natural rock formations. As a motorcycle road, it is extraordinary, technical, scenic, demanding. The Spearfish Canyon, the canyon road through Spearfish Creek, 20 miles of limestone canyon walls, waterfalls, dense forest, and a road that follows the creek through terrain producing temperature drops of 10 to 15 degrees compared to the surrounding plains. On a hot August afternoon in South Dakota, where the temperature on the plains can reach 100 degrees, Spearfish Canyon offered cool air and shade and roads that justified the drive from anywhere in the Midwest. This is what South Dakota offered. Not weather. The plains weather in August is unpredictable, with afternoon thunderstorms that arrive without warning. Not convenience, Sturgis is further from any major population center than any other major American rally venue. What South Dakota offered was the roads and the landscape. In a country where the best motorcycle roads are in California and the Pacific Northwest and the Appalachians, the Black Hills represented a specific concentration of extraordinary terrain in the middle of the Great Plains that had no equivalent for 1,000 miles in any direction. By the early 1970s, the rally had been growing steadily for 3 decades. The emphasis was still on racing under Pappy's direction. The Jack Pine Gypsies had built a short track, added hill climbs and motocross to the program, and maintained the event as a racing-centered gathering. Then the outlaw culture arrived. Not as an invasion, as a natural extension of what the American motorcycle community had become, the 1% clubs that had formed in the post-war era, grown through the 1950s and 1960s, and arrived at Sturgis because this is where American riders went, and they were American riders. The Sturgis City Fathers were concerned. The presence of outlaw clubs made local officials nervous in the specific way that official bodies get nervous when their event starts attracting attention that complicates the family-friendly narrative they had been building. They went to Pappy Hoel and asked him to ban the outlaw riders from the rally. He said no. His reasoning, documented across multiple historical accounts, was specific and simple. The riders had not done anything wrong. They were motorcyclists. Motorcyclists were welcome at the Black Hills Motor Classic. He had built this event specifically for the purpose of bringing motorcyclists together, and a motorcyclist who wore a 1% patch was as entitled to be there as anyone else. I personally think that decision, made by one man against the expressed wishes of the city that had been benefiting from his event for 30 years, is the single most important decision in the history of the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally. It established that the rally belonged to riders, not to the people who managed the economic activity that riders generated. Pappy Hoel did not romanticize the outlaw culture. He was a South Dakota businessman and racing promoter who had spent 40 years building a community around motorcycles. But he understood that you cannot selectively welcome the parts of a culture you find convenient and exclude the parts you find inconvenient without destroying the whole thing. He was right. Stop here for a moment. Pappy Hoel refusing the city council's request to ban outlaw riders because they were motorcyclists and motorcyclists were welcome, that decision has never been given the weight it deserves in any motorcycle history coverage. If that principle matters to you, if you believe motorcycle culture belongs to every rider, regardless of what they wear or what club they ride with. Share this video to the Facebook group where your riding community lives. Post it to Our Motorcycles and Our Sturgis and Our Harley Davidson on Reddit. The history that does not get shared does not get remembered. Share it before you scroll past. The history of the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally has a standard protagonist, Pappy Hoel. That story is accurate and important and worth telling. But there is another protagonist who the historical record treats as a supporting character and who was, in every practical sense, as essential to what Sturgis became as her husband. Pearl Hoel. Pearl cooked the food at the first Black Hills Motor Classic in 1938. Weenies, sloppy joes, potato salad, watermelon. She and the other Jack Pine Gypsies' wives prepared and served the meal in a tent behind the garage. She drove the chaser vehicle for the rally rides, following the motorcycle tours through the Black Hills to pick up riders whose machines had broken down. She is documented in the 1941 rally records specifically for her role as the driver who kept stranded riders from being stranded. Pearl Hoel survived to the age of 95. She had watched the event that she and Pappy had built together grow from 200 people in a backyard to 500,000 people in the Black Hills. In an interview in the late 1990s, she remembered the menu of the first rally with the specific clarity that people reserve for things that happened when they were young and fully present. Weenies, sloppy joes, potato salad, watermelon for dessert. The bikers washed their meal down with iced tea or coffee served in a tent behind the garage. She was not describing a founding moment. She was describing a Saturday afternoon when she made lunch for whoever showed up. That is the actual origin of the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally. A woman making lunch for whoever showed up. A man racing a motorcycle into a burning outhouse because he loved motorcycles and wanted other people to love them too. 9 riders on a half-mile dirt track in the Black Hills of South Dakota competing for a $500 prize while 200 people watched and ate watermelon. Everything that came after, the $800 million in annual economic activity, the 500,000 annual attendees, the concert stages, and the campground luxury packages, and the manufacturer demonstration areas, everything came after because of the lunch. By the early 1980s, the rally had grown beyond what the Jack Pine Gypsies could manage. The attendance was approaching 100,000. The logistics of organizing a gathering that size exceeded the capacity of a volunteer motorcycle club. In the 1980s, Pappy Hoel and the Jack Pine Gypsies turned the rally over to the city of Sturgis. The Buffalo Chip, the private campground that Rod and Terry Woodruff had opened in 1981 as a field with a bar, began its evolution into an entertainment complex. The concert lineups expanded, the vendor infrastructure multiplied. The economic activity grew in ways none of the original Jack Pine Gypsies had imagined. In 1983, South Dakota Governor Bill Janklow signed a proclamation declaring August 14th, the anniversary of the first Black Hills Motor Classic, J.C. Pappy Hoel Day in South Dakota. He received the AMA's Dud Perkins Award in 1983 for outstanding contributions to motorcycling. Pappy Hoel died on February 1st, 1989, at the age of 84. He had been born in South Dakota, had run the ice business, had bought the Indian franchise, had founded the Jack Pine Gypsies, had hosted the first rally in his backyard, and had watched it grow from 9 racers competing for $500 to something approaching 100,000 people annually before he turned it over to the city. He was inducted into the AMA Motorcycle Hall of Fame in 1998, 9 years after his death. The 86th Annual Sturgis Motorcycle Rally runs in August 2026. Attendance will be somewhere between 400,000 and 600,000 people over 10 days. The economic impact will be approximately $800 million. The Buffalo Chip Basic Tent Camping starts at $189 per night. A burger on Main Street costs what a burger costs at an airport. Some of those 400,000 to 600,000 people will trailer their motorcycles to Rapid City and drive to Sturgis in a truck. A 2022 survey found that 38% of rally attendees towed their bikes, up from 26% in 2015. The specific irony of trailering a motorcycle to the world's largest motorcycle rally has been noted by enough riders that it has its own discourse. Pappy Hoel addressed a version of this issue in the early 1970s when the city asked him to exclude outlaw riders. His answer, they are motorcyclists, they are welcome, applies to the trailer demographic too. They came. They are here. They are interested in motorcycles even if their relationship to motorcycles is different from Pappy's. But I personally think it is worth sitting with what was lost in the transition from the event that Pappy built to the event that exists today. The quality was community at a recognizable size. 200 people in 1938, 800 in 1939, 5,000 in 1940. At those numbers, a rider who showed up could look around and feel like they knew the room. They could eat lunch in a tent and talk to the man next to them and have the specific experience of being in a community rather than being in an event. That experience requires scale to be intimate. When the scale is 500,000 people, the intimacy is available only in the smaller moments. At the track where the races still run, on the roads at 6 in the morning before the traffic builds, at the specific spots where the Black Hills are doing what the Black Hills do regardless of who is watching. The greatest motorcycle rally on earth started with 9 riders on a dirt track, 200 spectators, and a woman named Pearl making weenies and potato salad in a tent behind a garage. It is still running 87 years later because the place that hosted it, the Black Hills of South Dakota, the roads that have not changed, does not care about the commercial scale. It offers the same roads it offered in 1938 to anyone who comes to ride them. Pappy Hoel would be pleased. Pearl, who remembered every detail of the first rally's menu, would probably have something specific and practical to say about the $26 hamburger.